All right, we'll continue our discussion now on siting of the hazardous waste management facility in North Carolina. We're going to continue panel with calls. The first is from Coleridge. Coleridge, go ahead.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'd like to address this one to Darrell and ask him to comment a little more about the five-state agreement, particularly the current laws of our nation allow anyone who shows up on the doorstep to burn at this incinerator, including New York, New Jersey, and heavy industrialized states. And I think it was just a little bit deceptive and maybe not stating the whole truth when you said it was a five-state agreement. There is an agreement, but there's absolutely nothing stopping the other states from coming in. And maybe he could comment on that.
All right, Darrell.
I'd be happy to. First of all, the agreement between the governors and then confirmed by our General Assembly said that there would be a priority established. That is, North Carolina's waste would be received first in this facility, and from that, then the agreement states waste would be received in this facility, and past that point, if there was any additional capacity left over, we would then make that capacity available for the other states. In fact, we are negotiating this week and last week with the 3 potential companies who might be operating this facility, and within that contract language, we specify that priority, and so we're not only locked in by the regional agreement, but we're also locking the operator in by a contractual relationship.
I think it's also important to emphasize that during the same period of time covered by this agreement, the 20-year period of time, we will also still be shipping hazardous waste out of North Carolina for treatment that cannot be managed at the facility that we're planning, so that it is a reciprocal arrangement. We will ship waste out to other facilities like aqueous treatment facilities, and those other states will be sending waste in that can be appropriately incinerated. So it's a reciprocal arrangement, actually.
All right, did we answer your question?
Can I ask something else?
Go ahead.
I would ask that if you get a 98% burn and 2,000 pounds of ash go up the stack, is that acceptable to you?
If 2,000 pounds of ash go up the stack, no, that would not be acceptable.
What is the percent burn?
The requirement, the standard that has to be met is 99.99% removal of the hazardous constituents, the principal hazardous constituents.
As I heard you, the company is doing the testing and all the tests will be announced. Is that correct?
The operator will prepare the test, but the test will be monitored by state regulatory agencies, and they will have to approve it, and the testing itself will have to be done by an independent organization.
Will there ever be any unannounced tests the company won't know about?
You know, I'm not sure whether there would be or not. My immediate answer would be that I'm not sure how you would do that, because this facility will be enclosed by a security fence, and it would not be possible to get into the facility without announcing your presence.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for calling us. Panel, our next call is from Clayton. Clayton, go ahead. You're with us.
Yes, in your discussion earlier, you stated that plans are being continued to meet the 1291 deadline.
Yes?
With the current budget problems that the state is experiencing, will that be a possibility and still be able to maintain the high standard which has been promised to us?
All right. Will the budget difficulties affect that December deadline?
I don't think they will, and the reason is that the cost of this facility, the total cost that have been incurred by the Management Commission to date, and the total cost of designing, constructing, and operating the facility will be a cost to the operating company and not to the state. And they will have to reimburse the state for all the expenses that we have had in this process.
All right, did we answer your question fully?
Yes, you did, but I have a follow-up also.
Please go ahead.
Also, it's my understanding that western Johnston County is in this, what you're calling the Piedmont area. If that is in fact so, what is the area that is included in that?
Trenton, could you help us with that?
Specify.
I'm not sure
Western Johnston County, you say?
I'm not sure I
correct.
could see from the map from here. May have to get back to
Can you see the
on
map
that.
Yeah, could we have a
Maybe
closer
zoom
view?
in and you can see.
Yeah.
If we could focus in on
But
Johnson County, you could see the area
It
that
is the-
would be available.
It is the far western. It's in the far
Can you
western
see the
portion.
part that our caller is asking about?
Yes.
Johnson County.
It's here near the
Be
edge
south
of the,
Wake.
Okay.
at the central, right there. That's
You
right.
should be able to see it now clearly on your TV screen.
So is that included in the area under consideration? We're not sure exactly what acreage you're talking about to our caller,
It's,
so
it is within the centroid, and it appears to be within the 45-mile radius of a meteorological station. So it appears that that area to the left of the dark line is still under consideration, yes.
And if the caller is interested, we have a larger scale map in our office that we would be happy for her to come by and look at to get you some exact idea of what areas of your county is available for consideration.
Does that address your concern this evening?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Nice footwork with that map. We have another call. This one is from Lexington. Lexington, go ahead, you're with us.
Yes, I'd like to know what would be the repercussions if the facility is not sited within the time frame from the federal EPA.
All right, does the EPA have any consideration in that?
Well, I think that there's not a consideration from the EPA. The EPA doesn't have any timetable involved in this process. What would happen is that North Carolina would lose access to the other facilities in the other agreement states. And as Dr. Turner said a few moments ago, we send large volumes of waste out to those facilities on a regular basis. For example, in 1988, North Carolina sent most of its waste to South Carolina. The majority, over 50% of it, went to South Carolina. If we don't meet our deadlines, we are out of this agreement, and out of this agreement means we can't use those facilities.
So you're saying the EPA at this point has nothing to do with it?
That's right.
All right,
Another
Trent?
Not really.
consequence is we would then have to assume the entire burden of handling and managing our waste generated in North Carolina,
All of the waste, you're saying, which is currently going out of state.
and much of which is shipped to South Carolina and Alabama for landfilling,
All
a
right.
secure chemical landfill.
All right, do you have a follow-up question, sir?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead.
I'm questioning the graph that the prevention pays program was depicting for the year 2009.
Yes?
With the advent of the TCLP procedure becoming in effect in September of this year, which is broadening the definition of hazardous waste, how can they accurately project the amount of hazardous waste generated in those time frames they stated earlier?
Let me take just a minute and ask you to explain to those of us who are not technically oriented what you're talking about at TCLP.
The toxic leachate characteristic
Okay, you're talking about a new standard that's coming in?
is a new analytical technique
All right.
that
John?
broadens the definition of hazardous waste.
Thank you.
This is a procedure that's used to determine if a toxic substance is likely to contaminate groundwater. It will restrict some other chemicals, some more chemicals from burial in landfills or disposal in landfills, and also it will probably increase the total volume of hazardous waste generated. But most of the waste that we're talking about under that category are not waste that would be incinerated at this facility.
If I can
Is that-
add something to
please
that,
do.
Dr. Turner. When we were doing our negotiations with the other states, and when we were making projections as to what kind of waste that would be there in the future, we said, and we were told by EPA as we were doing our SARA capacity assurance documents, we were only to consider those regulations that existed and those regulations that were already in place to come into existence by a certain date. The one that you're talking about is a proposed regulation, not one that has already been deemed to be active at a certain date and time. There are a lot of other regulations that are proposed that may affect the capacity and may affect the need to manage waste in addition to that TCLP restriction that you're talking about. For example, there is a characteristic or a quality now called industrial burners or industrial fuel recyclers, in which those companies don't have to meet the same restrictions. In the future, they may have to, and if they have to, it may mean that there's additional waste that would have to come to a facility like the one we're planning.
I believe I stand correct in saying that the TCLP was published in a recent edition of the Federal Register. It is in effect in 120 days from the date of publication, which will be the latter part of September. They listed 25 organics, as well as the metals and pesticides.
You'll have to remember that there's a lag between the time that the EPA puts out things and the time that you're talking about, in that when we were doing our capacity assurance document, we were instructed very matter-of-factly to consider the base year as 1987. And as a result of that consideration, we could only consider rules that were appropriate and had already been promulgated and had a final date imposed as of that date, 1987. And the rules you're talking about were not at that point in time.
Very good. On the recycling facility, is that mainly for halogenated hydrocarbons?
It's for both halogenated and non-halogenated hydrocarbons. We envision that there may be about a 50-50 split between those two that would come to this component of the facility.
Will the operators of the facility participate in a marketing of the recycled material?
Well, we have several different plans. What we have from the proposals from the companies, one would have a direct remarketing plan in their program. The other two would take the material, make separate cuts, as it's called, distillation cuts, and take those materials and sell them to a re-refiner who would do further differentiation between those solvents, and that company would then market them back to the marketplace.
Okay, but each time you're recycling and distilling, you have a still bottom, and from the derived from rule, you would have two sources of a hazardous waste if you go back and redistill. Is that not correct?
That's right, and what we would say is the still bottoms from our facility would either be treated in our incinerator, or if by any stretch of the imagination they could be landfilled, they might be landfilled in the process. And if we sent it then to a re-refiner and he pulled out another small amount of still bottoms as you're describing them, he would have to send those still bottoms back to this facility for processing again.
I have one more question, and I'll
All right, if you will move quickly because we do have other people waiting.
The leachate from the landfill, will that be burned in the incinerator on site, or could that be discharged to a POTW or via NPDES permit?
Again, for those of us who are not technically oriented, would you rephrase your question just a bit?
Okay, the leachate from the landfill,
All right.
which is basically rainwater that is seeped through the cells and collected in an underdrain system,
All right.
which might contain trace contaminants. Will that be incinerated on site? Could it ultimately go to a public-owned treatment works facility of the host county, or could it be dumped directly into a navigable river?
Okay.
I think the best answer to that would be that the leachate that was collected by the system, the leachate collection system, would obviously be pumped to the surface and it would be tested. And I think the results of the test would determine how we would manage that. If it had any BTU value and it could be burned, it would probably be burned right there in our incinerator. If it could not be burned, then we may treat it biologically or chemically. Or what we may have to do is, that may be part of the waste stream that we would have to ship to some other facility in one of the agreement states.
Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you for joining us this evening. The next call is from Greensboro. Greensboro, go ahead. We have you.
Yes, in relation to the facility being built, have all the alternative power sources been considered to operate that facility, primarily solar and possibly water, so that more hazardous waste doesn't have to be developed by that facility?
All right. Trent.
Darrell, would you like to deal with
Darrell?
that?
I think that you'll be pleased to hear that the incinerator generates enough heat that we will be able to generate steam, and in several of the proposals that we have from the companies who are bidding to operate this facility, they would recommend steam recycling through and power generation, so that there would be enough power generated from the incinerator itself to operate the facility.
Okay, my main concern is not having to make more of the same problem we have to deal with.
Basically, we're hoping that there will be no liquid discharge from the facility at all.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you for your call this evening. We're talking about the proposed hazardous waste management facility, which will be built in the Piedmont region of North Carolina. Our telephone number is area code 919-733-6341, and we will continue to take your calls and talk with you in a few minutes. The discussion we just saw certainly puts monitoring in perspective for us, both the videotape and some of the calls we've had, panel. A lot will evidently be done to oversee the facility. I guess what's left now is the what-if question. And I'll ask any of the three of you. What if, with all the proper permitting, with all the needed monitoring, what if there is a catastrophic accident or fire or something of that nature at the facility? That's a question a lot of people are going to be asking themselves, and will be asking you, I would guess, later in the hour. How will the facility cover the damages to the surrounding community or to its workers and its neighbors? Professor Davis. Trenton, you one. That was a pregnant pause there. Go ahead, gentlemen.
I guess, are we talking about Insurance, I guess I'm trying to get a handle on the question where
Right,
we're
let's
going
gear
with
it
the
toward
question.
insurance, the monetary
And,
damages at this point.
And that's a very good question, and I think it's one we all have to be concerned about, citizens of North Carolina and members of this commission. We certainly want the facility to have adequate insurance coverage to enable it to pay for any unforeseen damages. We've met several times, commission and the staff, with state insurance personnel to discuss the types of insurance and coverage that this facility will need and will be required. And I must tell you, it's a very lengthy list, and I don't understand all of the discussions involved in insurance, but those who deal with this, I think, are impressed with the discussions and what's going to be required in the way of insurance for this facility. So that would be one way of answering the question you raised.
Okay, you mentioned talks with state insurance personnel. Last week, Darrell talked with Joe, is it Rippard?
Yes.
Okay, who is a risk manager with the Department of Insurance about the insurance requirement for the hazardous waste facility. We're going to watch a videotape of that conversation, but first we'll take your calls right after the tape, and our number is 919-733-6341. You're welcome to join us for this discussion, and you may call us collect or direct to join in the discussion about siting a hazardous waste facility in North Carolina. But first, let's take a look at that tape.
Joe, as risk manager for the Department of Insurance, you have provided some expertise and background information to the Hazardous Waste Management Commission in the past. We get questions from citizens frequently about how we're planning to cover and to protect the public in case there is an event or a catastrophic accident. Would you give me an idea of the kind of insurance that will be required for a facility like the one we're talking about building?
I'll be glad to. Basically, some of the coverages the citizens are already familiar with. These would include property insurance and automobile insurance. Some of the additional coverages you need to consider are going to be in the areas of workers' comp, general liability, and environmental pollution.
Okay. We hear that last one mentioned frequently, environmental impairment insurance, environmental pollution control insurance. Give us and the viewers a few ideas as to what kind of coverage that is and what kind of events it might take care of.
All right. Well, environmental impairment is normally excluded from the commercial insurance policies that are in the marketplace. What it does, it provides for pollution incidents, whether sudden, normally it will be sudden, it can be gradual, that occur in the area of waste management. This could include property damage such as pollutions from the incinerator, damaging a third party's property. To give you an example, their acid lands on an individual's car and the car has to be repainted. The other thing would be ground pollution, where hazardous materials are spilled on the grounds and it has to be cleaned up. And it could be in very extreme situations where you have actual bodily injury. Mm-hmm. There's excess contamination of the air, and the general public breathes some of that air, and they have